Welcome. We are almost ready to start. This morning's topic is utilizing logic models to demonstrate outcome accountability. So hopefully that is what you are here for. We are going to go to the next slide so I can introduce our presenters this morning, and I'm going to ask the three of you actually for a moment to come on camera. This morning we have Samantha Flory, who is a training and technical assistance coordinator, Cynthia Smith, evaluation specialist and program planning coordinator, and Edie Winkle, who is also a training and technical assistance coordinator. The team today that is presenting is with the Friends National Resource Center on CBCAP, which is community-based child abuse prevention. And I can say with certainty that these three are passionate about the topic this morning. And so I think it's going to be a fun morning, but I think it's also going to be really helpful for many of you who are working on logic models in the moment. I am going to hand it off to Samantha and the rest of the team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana. Thank you for the introduction. And Edie and Cynthia and I are happy to be here with you all today to talk about logic models. And we get to be here, the Friends National Center. We provide training and technical assistance to CBCAP funded programs across the country. And OCAP there in California, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, is the CBCAP lead there in California. And so we work closely with them, and that's why we get to come along and do this training for all of you today. So as Dana mentioned, we do encourage you to put questions in that question and answer space there along the bottom of your screen. And we will have a couple different times throughout this training that we will pause and get to those, and for sure at the end as well. So you all saw the learning objectives when you registered, but want to go over them quickly with you again. Hopefully by the end of today's training, you'll be able to describe the purpose of a logic model. We're really going to talk about what that means, also define the components of a logic model, and you'll be able to develop your own. We're going to walk you through that and work on different pieces of it with you today. And then you'll be able to come back if you'd like on November 3rd with the three of us to really dig deeper and ask questions about that. So before we move on, I want to do a quick poll with you all. You would take just a moment to let us know what your experience is with creating logic models. Have you done it before? Have you maybe helped, been on a team, been a part of assisting creating one? Or is this your first time and you're here just as a sponge to soak it all in and learn how to do it? So we'll give you a few more seconds to let us know what your experience is. And this is really helpful to Edie and Cynthia and I as we move forward and work on how we can best support you all with this. And I'm going to be honest, I'll show the results in a minute, but it's all neck and neck. So, all right.
Quite the mix there, quite the mix.
Yeah. So all of you have answered, thank you so much. And let's see, we'll share our results with you. So it looks like just inching out is about 40% of you have never created a logic model. So you are definitely in the right place today. Another about 30% of you have created a logic model, and then another 30% or so have assisted with creating a logic model. So glad you all are here. We've got a lot of information to share with you, and we will help you along the way to get yours created. I'm going to turn things over to Cynthia. She's going to talk for a minute about comprehensive prevention plan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samantha. I really appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why you may be having this particular presentation right now. And I'm so glad many of you are here to soak in the information. We're happy to present the information to you around logic models as well. So again, I want to try to connect this training to what many of you may be working on currently, which is your comprehensive prevention plan. As you know, in the state of California, the local Title IV-E agencies that were opting into the Family First Prevention Services program are required to submit the comprehensive prevention plan. And that will include things like your primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention and intervention strategies, those services that will support the ability of parents and families to provide safe, stable, and nurturing environments for their children. So that's, what your plans will be about. But it also includes the theory of change or logic model, which will also describe the activities and the intended outcomes for children, youth, parents, caregivers, and families. And so the logic model really does help you to be able to identify and designate those outcomes of the services and the activities that are part of your prevention plan that you will be submitting to the state. So a logic model is really helpful in terms of kind of being that, for better or for worse, critical thinking task for you to really think about how to connect the goals of your cross-sector partnerships to align with the intent of both the state and federal legislation. Because I'm sure you all can appreciate the state of California also has to submit an evaluation to the federal government anytime they use federal money. So, just your ability at the local level to be able to think comprehensively about those outcomes, do a comprehensive evaluation planning, and your logic model can help you get there. And so later on, I'll talk a little bit more about the distinction between a theory of change and a logic model, but I have to be honest with you, academicians always argue over the distinction between the two. So there's never really any clear-cut difference between the two, but I'll kind of give you a basic model of what might be considered differences between the theory of change and logic model. So next slide, please. So why do we evaluate? Well, one reason may be because we have to, right? Yeah, but hopefully you realize that there's more reasons than because we have to for why we evaluate or the outcome accountability. So we evaluate because we have an obligation. Not only do we have an obligation to our state and federal partners when we're thinking about, applying for funding, but we also have an obligation to evaluate to learn if our services really are resulting in those positive changes that they're designed to achieve. We owe it to our clients, our families, the children that we're serving to evaluate whether or not the services we're providing are positive or resulting in positive changes with them. It's also important to evaluate to learn so that we identify what we're doing that works and what doesn't. So really, evaluation is that ability to adjust and improve our services based on data, and we call this continuous quality improvement. Evaluation also allows us to tell our story and advocate for our programs. So again, there is the obligation at the federal level for Family First Prevention Services Act. It does require evaluation. And so obviously when you receive the funding through the state of California, you also have an obligation to evaluate. But it really truly is that accountability for resources that are used and the results that they are supposed to produce. And that's why we evaluate. Next slide. So many of you may be thinking, my goodness, Cynthia, we're using evidence-based practices. Why do we have to evaluate? And people give lots of reasons for why they shouldn't have to evaluate, why they shouldn't have to develop a logic model. But I just really want to kind of keep going, Samantha, but there are lots of reasons why people indicate this. And so again, we're not necessarily saying that these things aren't true. Certainly when your services are evidence-based, but you may be using a different population than what the evidence-based program was designed for. So it's important to look at the results of your use of the program to see if it really does have an impact on that new target population. Everybody agrees the program works, absolutely. But again, if it's in a different context, different populations being served, it's always important to do that evaluation. So again, we know we need to evaluate. And so how can a logic model help us get there? Next slide, please. So why do we use logic models? Many of you may be thinking, Cynthia, you're using logic models just to torture us. It's a great way to torture people, right? Well, so is PowerPoint too, right? But what I hopefully, and later on when I finish speaking, I also want to highlight for you that there are some videos out there that tell you that provide some opportunities for you to learn to love your logic model, because there really is an opportunity to think about logic models in a far more positive way. So next slide. So why do we use logic models? Well, logic models really are a template for planning services, implementing services, evaluating your services, which I just spoke a lot about, and also then in reporting. And I think it's really helpful for you to think about that logic models do all four of these things in addition to many other things. One of the things that I found really helpful for a logic model that I utilized when I was working on a federal grant is that, and I'm later going to tell you that you need to keep your logic model to a 1-page. Well, the federal grant I worked on, we actually had 2.5 pages for our logic model. But the reason why is because it not only helped us to plan, identify those services we wanted to implement, it also helped us in terms of identifying whether or not we were implementing many of our evidence-based practices with fidelity. So a logic model can help you do that. It also, our logic model for our federal grant also became our evaluation plan and our communication plan. And so I really do want you to think about that logic models aren't just these 1-page documents that you make up because you have to do so. You hand them to the state and then you're done with it. Logic models really should be that opportunity for you to continually review, go back, look at, have a discussion with your stakeholders, your team that you're working with on your comprehensive prevention plan, and really think about, what are we doing well? What's not working well? What can we do differently? And how does that help us report fabulous results that I know many of you are going to show, all of you are going to show with the families and children in California. Next slide. So again, why do we need logic models? A logic model really is an illustration of a thought process. And I think that's a really great way to think about logic models and how they can be really helpful, is that they truly are a logical way to identify what you're doing, how you'll be doing that, what impact that service or program has, and then also how you're going to measure that impact as well. So a logic model really is a tool that has a multitude of uses. It's a document, again, usually about a 1-page. It describes those logical links between your services, the population served, and your desired outcomes. And developing a logic model is a process. And so I want you to probably document as much of that process as you can, but it really does lead to critical thinking for you, as well as about planning services and that outcome accountability. It is a graphic representation of a logical thought process. So you may be thinking, well, how's that different than from a theory of change? Because a theory of change is also a visual representation, but a theory of change, generally speaking, is about a causal relationship and explains how and why change occurs. And so for many of us, unfortunately, we have a really difficult time when we think about prevention programs of saying that our prevention programs cause a specific outcome. We know it influences certain things like reducing risk of abuse, or it may help to increase, strengthen certain factors, protective factors that we believe protect families and children, but they don't necessarily cause a reduction in child abuse and neglect. Instead, they generally tend to have more of a logical approach to things that we know we can have a more direct impact on than just reducing specifically child abuse and neglect. And so that's one reason why at Friends, we really do take the approach of using a logic model, because it tends to be a little more concise than a theory of change. And it doesn't depend on that causal relationship explanation. So theories of change really do talk more about the context, how and why something occurs, and how there's a direct impact between what we're doing and the outcomes that we're seeing. And so there's a lot more depth involved with the theory of change, and logic models just really do provide us kind of more of a concise way of presenting that critical thought processes that we're engaging when we have a discussion with our stakeholders. Next, thanks. So I really want you all to think about logic models as a drawing board. I'm hoping that you're thinking about your logic model and you're currently working on your logic model in consultation with other program stakeholders. And those can include individuals like direct service staff, management, individuals that are actually going to be served by your program, what we might consider to be consumers, or those with lived experiences. It's really important to include those individuals in the development of your logic model and getting feedback on your logic model. So even though today in the training, we're going to be asking you to complete portions of the logic model worksheet, we certainly do want to encourage you to incorporate and ask for feedback and do work on your logic model with that group of individuals who are working with you on your comprehensive prevention plan. We also know that logic models are a living document and that it should be reviewed and modified as part of the continuous quality improvement process. And certainly many of you may be at the development phase where you're just beginning to think about the services you want to implement within your communities, but it also, logic model can be helpful in terms of the implementation of those services and then the eventual evaluation of it as well. So it really is kind of a logic model, begins at the beginning, continues throughout, and even at the end when you're evaluating the impact of your services, a logic model can be very helpful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Edie to discuss the components of a logic model.
Thank you, Cynthia. So as we jump into this, I first want to just pause and let you know that we put a worksheet in the download in the chat earlier. And I just want to give you a moment to make sure that you've got that because we're actually going to be using it. I'm going to do an activity. Oh, perfect. Thanks. We just put it back in the chat. Just if you have not downloaded it, please do, because we're going to do an activity with it here in just a moment. So I just wanted to take that and call attention to that. I'm going to go through at this point for the components of a logic model. Now, we're going to give you the terms that we use. We're going to also tell you some alternative terms as we talk through it, but just know that there are lots of different terms out there for these. And it's okay to call it whatever you need to call it, and to just go through that piece. So don't get hung up on the words, I guess, is what I want to say. Next slide. So let's talk about vision.
And Edie, we have a poll. You let me know when you'd like me to launch that, okay?
Yeah, for sure. I was gonna, I mean, I guess we can do it before I go through the definition. So,
Sure.
yeah.
You want me to launch it?
Sure. So, does your organization or program have a vision statement? This one's probably a much simpler question than we already asked earlier. Give it another minute. Still got lots of answers coming in. Well, there is an overwhelming winner on this one. So give you guys just another couple of seconds and then we can share those results with you. Yeah, you want to go ahead and share those? Excellent. So you guys can see 90% of you guys said yes, you do. Couple said nope, and another couple said unsure. Fabulous. Really thank you guys for giving us that feedback. So vision statements really should be a part of your logic model because they help to provide that overall structure for what and how needs to happen. And so really talking about this, it is a broad statement that really provides the overall vision or effect that you're hoping to put forth within your organization. It is really a key to helping move the work forward. You'll see some examples here: safe and healthy children, stable, nurturing families, children successful in school, nurturing communities that value children. Now, my suspicion is that your vision statement for your organization is much longer than these. right? It probably has lots of flowery language, maybe 2 or 3 sentences to it even. And I encourage you, if that's the case, to really take a look at that vision and try to narrow it down. And you'll notice here we've got some alternative terms for vision, like goal, impact, or long-term outcome. And that's really about sort of boiling it down to what's that thing when somebody asks, what are you guys hoping to do, that can just roll off your tongue really quickly? What is that statement that you want to have happen? You know, when somebody says, hey, what are you guys hoping to accomplish? Nurturing communities that value children. That's what we want to have. So that's what I encourage you with regards to your logic model to get to a vision statement about. It really doesn't need to be measurable, so don't get hung up on that. Oftentimes, the kinds of things that we put together for vision are long-term, like down the road sort of pieces. And so not getting caught up in, oh, we need to be able to measure this. No, because it's probably difficult and costly. And frankly, most of us don't have that kind of money, right? Within our program. So really allowing yourself to think big, but to have it be the thing that you can tie all your work back to, because I think that's the key. And if you're, trying to figure out something and it doesn't seem to be fitting, maybe it's that it doesn't support the vision, right? Okay, next slide. So now let's
Edie,
talk.
we had a question for you. Is there a
Oh,
difference
sure.
between a vision and a mission statement?
So, yes. That's sort of the short answer, right? Yes. So for me, a mission statement often is that piece that talks about, that overall larger picture. And the vision is that the change you hope to be, I guess I would say. And for me, sometimes the mission is, the organization statement of how you're going to maybe get there. So again, some folks may say they're interchangeable. I say that they are not. That oftentimes the vision is maybe even much bigger than the mission statement. Any other questions, Cynthia, before I jump to the next piece?
Nope, that was the only one. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so now let's talk about, you've got your vision, your big global view, right? So let's talk about target group. This is also sometimes referred to population served. This is really, who is it that you're hoping to serve? Who is it that is going to receive these services that you're proposing or that you're giving? Is it a general population in a particular geographic area? Is it a particular age population in an entire community? Is it particular zip codes? What does that look like? An example might be all parents residing in Teton County who choose to participate, right? Or maybe you're limited by your funding or your program's mission to serve a narrow group. So, for example, maybe your target population is going to be parents referred to our program by child welfare, the health department, or the district court due to risk factors, right? Maybe it looks like that. Maybe it's non-custodial fathers. It can be highly varied, right? But having a sense of that. For this particular program, what does that target population look like? Now, oftentimes we are, if we're designing something new, maybe we think we know who we're going to serve. But I have to stress here that really getting participant input here is a key. We might know what families need or who's going to come through the door, but maybe not. And so really taking a time to, as we're thinking through this and we're putting this down on paper, to talk to those potential consumers, those potential participants, you know, connecting with our lived experience partners and really getting information from them is going to help us make sure that we've got the right target group or planned population to serve, and that we're designing services in the right way specific for them. All right, next step, let's talk about identifying the need. So as we're talking about this target population, ideally, before you've ever even gotten there, you've really understood the need, right? What is the need? We've done a needs assessment. We've seen a gap in services in the community. Something's happened, and we're saying this is the need that we're trying to fill. Being very specific in that and realizing that you can't fill all the needs, and really, being thoughtful about which needs are you going to focus on with this particular program, with this particular activity. Excuse me. What are the participants' needs that this program intends to address? And again, if you've engaged with those lived experience partners, those potential participants, you're going to have a better sense of what that looks like. What problem your services will help to solve really helps to guide as you go through the next pieces of this of the logic model. And so, for example, you might be proposing we will serve newly arrived immigrant families who are unfamiliar with the laws and customs in the United States. They need to understand the social, educational, and medical services available to their families and the laws that are related to parenting. Maybe that's it, right? That's the need statement. That's what this is really driving, that piece. Now, there needs to be a logical link between your needs, your assets, what are you able to do, as well as then the services, outcomes, and indicators. They all need to be driven by this need. So make sure as you're putting this together, you know what else has been done and what this needs to look like. And are there any partners you need to have at the table with you as you decide to move forward? Are there other organizations that are working with those families, say, that would be a good partner to have as you move forward? Really thinking about that as a part of your needs statement. Okay, next. So what caused the problem? Before you plan to fix something, you need to really understand that underlying cause of the trouble, right? Why are we here? Why did this happen? For example, let's say your basement's flooding. This is a problem, right? Your neighbor told you that when his basement flooded, it was because of poor drainage around his house, because water to seep in through the cement, right? He solved that problem by replacing his sump pump, digging draining ditches. He got the French drains, did the thing all around the foundation of the house and regrading his lot. If you did the same thing to your problem, you might be throwing away good money, because come to find out, your basement flooded because there was a leak in the hose to your washing machine. So all you really needed to do was replace that hose. So understanding the reasons something's happening is important before you set about trying to fix it. Otherwise, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a problem that maybe had completely different causes. And if we don't get rid of the irritation that caused the sore, then we can't fix it. Excuse me. So while you're really examining your target population's needs and aspirations, what are those problems that they're facing? It's important to study the theories about the causes of the problem. And there may be many different causes and competing theories about the cause. But your services should be designed to address what you believe to be the cause or causes, so that you're getting to the root problem as opposed to just putting a Band-Aid on. So what do I mean by this? Let's give an example. So let's say you work with some teen parents and they use punitive disciplinary techniques with their children, right? They are being very punitive with their kids. So my first theory is that it's a lack of knowledge, right? That's the cause. That teen parents are showing negative or abusive parenting behaviors because they lack knowledge of child development or age-appropriate discipline techniques, right? Now, that's a theory. So what could we do to overcome that? We could offer child development classes that offer hands-on parent-child interactions in an environment that really offers the ability for teachers and supportive role modeling to show and help build the knowledge for our teen parents. Now, if this is the case, and that's what happens, that could be a fix. But let's consider a different theory, right? What if it's that they don't lack knowledge? What if it's that they have a personal history and that's the cause? That our teen parents are showing negative or abusive parenting behaviors because they experience a great deal of stress and because they experienced these same kind of parenting behaviors from their own parents when they were children. And so they're doing what they know. Maybe that's what it is. So is just modeling that behavior gonna help that theory? Maybe not. Maybe we need to offer some counseling and support for those teen parents. Maybe we need to offer some weekly respite care to reduce the parent's stress. We need to look at that and really understand that root cause. And so thinking about that as you move forward is really important. So I want us to now, let's start to put some pen to paper. Okay. I want you to take your logic model that you've downloaded now onto your computer and really think about it. Now, we're not going to have time to do all of the things on here, right? So what I want you to start with is just that vision statement. What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? And then what are those needs? I'm going to give you 3 minutes on your own, and then we will circle back and jump into some more content. If in the meantime you have questions, we'll be available on the chat.
We also have a couple of additional questions too that we'll want to come back to as well, Edie.
Perfect. Thank you, Cynthia.
Sure.
I'm wondering if we want to talk about those questions as people are jotting down their notes that may be helpful to them.
It may be. Yeah. So Edie, what are some of the commonly used methods to help identify the needs that you were speaking of earlier?
Sure. Actually, I was just typing something into the question and answer box on that one.
Oh, okay.
And I can definitely do that and offer something more comprehensive there. But you can do community surveys. You can do just a quick focus group of your potential constituents. You can look at existing data sources. Maybe your community does the breakfast, which is a community needs assessment, and get access to that data. Do you have a United Way in the community that does their annual needs assessment? So those are really some of the pieces you can do. And it doesn't have to be something, huge and formal. You literally could sit down a group of your parents and say, what's going on? What are your needs? What are the things, the challenges, the struggles that doesn't seem to be a fit or a fill within the community to help you overcome. The next one there was interested in the how part to achieve the goal of each step of the logic model. What are the effective methods that you would recommend to help identify the true cause of the problem? You really have to sort of dive in on this. Identifying that true cause can be a challenge. I think that having those conversations with more than just sort of your internal staff, I think sometimes we get tunnel vision, right? That we get so fixated on a piece. And an example was actually, we had this great Poverty Institute last week, and this really powerful example came up for me. We were in a workshop and we were talking about housing and, what are those supports? What can we do, for families to offer, to get them in affordable housing? And so there were all these things being bounced around about stipends and grants and, this and that. And we had a parent with us. Actually, we had several parents, but one of the parents spoke up and she said, you know what? When we were really on the verge of homelessness and struggling with housing, the piece for me that we needed was just help with getting gas in the car, so that we could get back and forth to work, because that was the difference, right? We just didn't have that cash money to put in the gas tank to get back and forth to work so that we got that paycheck coming in and could maintain our housing. And we also needed just some help with some work clothes. So it wasn't for them about a referral to affordable housing or, having some big, elaborate process, but it was just that piece of them being able to say, this is what we need. And so I think sometimes we make assumptions about what's helpful, and we do need to take that step back. And that's where I think having those lived experience partners be a part of the development of this will help you get to those root causes. And I know we're now out of time on that piece, but we did have one more question for vision. If our agency has one, do we just try using that, or do we come up with a new vision for a program we are starting? So I think that that's up to you, right? Is it that we need to have a new vision, or is it that this fits under that? Do we need a subvision, maybe sometimes for a particular program? I think it's absolutely fine that you have one overarching vision and that, you have multiple programs that fit under that and that they might each have their own logic model. I think that that's absolutely fine, right? It's really what is it that feels best for you as you're moving forward with this. Okay, perfect. Gosh, great questions. I always love it. As we move forward now, we're going to talk some about services and assumptions. And guys, this is a quick brush on logic models. And I know we're going to give you guys some resources later on. So know that we're going to provide you with some other pieces here. And this is really about sort of helping you get introduced to the concepts. Excuse me. So assumptions, what are those? We all know what happens when you make assumptions, right? So this is really the basis for why you're doing what you're doing. Why do you think that what you're proposing to do is going to be effective and is going to work for your families, right? And that's your assumptions. So one thing, services should be based on what we know is effective. We also know that in prevention, we don't always know what's effective. There's not a lot of money out there sometimes in prevention. And frankly, measuring prevention is incredibly difficult, right? We're trying to prove that something we weren't for sure was going to happen didn't happen. That's almost impossible. Let's be honest. So we have to really dig into what are those what's that best available knowledge. And you guys in California have a great resource. The California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse has some great stuff. But sometimes those programs are really comprehensive and expensive, and you can't afford to do the whole piece. So really just taking a look and understanding the research, understand what has worked, if anything, for these populations for the kind of problem you're looking at. Now, assumptions should play a key role in your service selection. And really, you should do the research before you ever dive in to trying to pick what services you want to do, because it might be that you are attempting to address a problem and you've got an idea in mind, right? That might work. But then if you dive into the research, maybe you find that somebody's already tried that idea and maybe it didn't work. And so really taking a look at that and being clear on that, I think, is important. So knowing that research or evaluation literature that supports your strategy, and that's what helps you put together an assumption statement. An assumption statement really is, we believe that offering parenting education for our teen parents is going to be successful because the research has shown right? And just really being clear. That also helps the other people in your program be clear that you didn't just pick this on a whim, that you were thoughtful about what you chose and that you believe, based on the best available, information out there, that this is going to work. So there's the assumptions. So now let's talk about services. So services are excuse me, so sorry. Also known sometimes as activities or outputs for your program. And these are based on that needs assessment of your target population. Based on the assumptions, based on all this stuff you've already figured out, right? This is what you're gonna do. This is what it's gonna look like. What are you gonna provide and exactly what is it? And it's important here to try to be specific as you move forward. So just saying we're going to provide home visitation necessarily isn't specific enough, right? Okay, so what does that look like? Well, we're going to offer the nurturing parenting program. So, picking a specific curriculum. And maybe you're not going to use a specific curriculum for your particular population. Perhaps you are just going to really talk about you're going to offer home visiting. We're going to offer 6 home visits in the first 6 months of a baby's life that focus on safe sleep with infants within the home. There's no curriculum maybe that you're using, but you specified, your dose, your frequency. You should also really consider, what is that target number of families you plan to serve in an environment that you're going to offer services. Like, for example, home visiting. Home is implied, but maybe it's not always the home. Maybe you are going to allow the family to pick the location for those visits that they're most comfortable in. Specifying that in your services statement is a piece that's important. So let me show you a couple of examples. Next slide, please, Samantha. Okay, so services. Here, 12 one-hour parenting education sessions using the Safe Homes curriculum. There you go. Nice, succinct services statement that gives you an example. Another one here. Providing participant access to concrete materials such as fencing, stair gates, car seats. So perhaps these concrete supports are a piece of the parenting education sessions that you're going to offer to help support that work. So it would be fine to have multiple service statements within one particular logic model. That's okay. It doesn't all have to be, summed up in one statement. Excuse me. And here's an assumption statement that would support this, right? 2 evaluations of the Safe Homes curriculum, because that's the curriculum we're going to use. Each conducted over a 3-year period found that children of parents who had participated in the program were 50% less likely to experience preventable injuries than children in comparison groups. So really, there's the piece. That's what this might look like for you, and beginning to think through making sure you've got those assumptions that support your service statements. So on this next slide, I just want to point out that there are some great resources here if you need to dive in and research your assumptions. And please know, I could do like a 6-hour series on researching assumptions alone. But this is really that piece about knowing what's out there. Here's some great resources. Of course, California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse is one of those that are here. Many of you right now are probably familiar with the Title 4E Prevention Services Clearinghouse because that's part of the FFPSA. Yes, I know it's really limited. We're working, to hope that list continues to expand. And then the Child Welfare Information Gateway that we've listed here. Actually, this link, I'll tell you, doesn't work. We discovered that right as we were getting ready to get on the call. The materials that you'll get afterwards, the link will be corrected and will be in there. But there is a great section on the Child Welfare Information Gateway on prevention that includes, how do you do some research? They give you some lists around evidence-based resources and really helps you sort of take a look at some of those pieces. And they've got it broken down like by home visiting and parent education, like they have different categories and stuff already put together for you as well. So just some great resources if you need to jump in and research your assumptions. So take a look at that. And I am now, I think, going to pause and hand it over to Samantha to talk some more about where you go from here.
Yes, thank you, Edie. So I want to talk about, we've thought about a lot of things. Edie has given you great information to get you thinking about that logic model. Hopefully you all are taking some notes, and we'll give you a couple of pauses to do that as well. I'm sure your brains are spinning right now with all this information. We want to move into talking about resources. So you've decided and identified the services that you want to provide, but what do you need to provide them? It's great if you've decided what you want to offer, but there's a lot that goes into making a decision about what can support you in those services and thinking about what you already have and what you may need, because there are things that you might have thought you had available that aren't there, and vice versa. You may have some resources in your back pocket that you hadn't thought of. So really thinking about what do you actually need to provide them. And you want to consider this, of course, before you go to implement the services. You don't want to get there and try to put things together and you realize that there's some things that are missing. So always thinking about those resources that you need. Some of this even includes the things like supplies, equipment, staff that you might need to provide these services. We've been hearing a lot lately in the family support field that programs are having a hard time hiring, and really hiring sometimes within your communities. I know there are some real rural areas in California, and so finding program staff to work in some of these areas is a little bit more difficult. So you want to be aware of those resources that you need, what hiring new staff could mean to you, what you're able to pay if you're going to be implementing these new services. What does that look like to actually support bringing on more staff, and what do you need for that? Are there actually a pool of candidates in the area that you can turn to? So a lot of things to think about with resources. You also want to think about room space if you're creating something new, the things that you'll need, furniture, paper. If you decide on a particular curriculum, Edie gave you some resources earlier to look some of those up. So there are a lot of capacity related things with resources that you do want to think about. Many of you may be using some of the evidence-based programs like Parents as Teachers and other things, and you know that with that, you can't just hand the curriculum to a staff person and have them do it. You've actually got to get folks trained to be a facilitator in different things. So these are all things to consider as you're looking at the services that you want to provide, what leads up to actually doing that. And this is all things that go in your logic model, these different steps of getting up and running and having those resources in place. So just thinking about it a little further, because we're going to give you in just a minute the opportunity to write a little bit more in your own logic models, but there's 2 questions that you want to drill down on. The first one is, what resources do you already have? So taking an inventory of that, you may need to sit down with other staff and folks from your community and really look at what's already there. And then what resources do you need? What's missing that can help you implement the services that you want to do and ultimately implement this logic model that you're working on. So think about what you have access to and how that'll support your program. You want to kind of jot these things down as you're thinking about your resources available. So we're going to give you a couple more minutes, just as Edie did earlier, to go back through the last few things that we talked about. So Edie had talked about services and assumptions. And so now you want to take a look at that logic model worksheet and write down some of the services there in that box, and also any assumptions you are making that suggest your services will work. You want to make sure you get those out there and write those down. And then what resources you have and what you need. So we're going to give you maybe just 2 minutes just to start writing this down. And the goal of these activities is for you to get some stuff on paper so that you can start thinking about this and bring it back for us in a more complete form in November for us to talk about on November 3rd. So I'll give you a couple minutes as you're jotting things down. I'm going to turn to Cynthia and Edie if there's any questions that we could answer right now.
There were no questions posed for this one, so far so good.
Perfect. We'll give them another minute. And as you keep jotting this down, and we encourage you to take notes throughout, and you might get a great idea in the middle of our discussion, so you don't need to wait till the activity to write down different things on your model. We are going to turn things over to Cynthia, and she is going to go into outcomes.
Thanks, Samantha. I appreciate it. Hope everybody enjoys the opportunity to begin thinking about outcomes. And you may be thinking, Cynthia, you talked to us at the very beginning saying that the logic model is going to help me create this evaluation plan. And you're just now getting to outcomes. Yes. In your logic model, this is when you really want to start thinking about your outcomes, is when you've already started thinking about your services. You've figured out your resources that you have available. What are some of those assumptions? Because again, your outcome is really going to be the change that you think occurs as a result of the programs or services that you are providing. An outcome evaluation, again, we're going to focus mainly on the participant and not on your program. So it's really going to be participant-focused outcomes. Outcome evaluation is not the same as program evaluation, which really examines your services and methods of service delivery, staffing patterns, staff training, all the things that Samantha just talked to you all about, fidelity to the service model. That's really program evaluation. What we're talking about is outcome evaluation, looking at how the participant, you believe the participant is going to change as a result of the programs and services. That being said, service delivery, staffing patterns, staff training, fidelity to the service model are all directly related to your outcomes. The results of your outcome evaluation should reflect on your program elements, and again, are one of those key pieces in your continuous quality improvement. So as you get outcomes, as you get your outcomes about the programs and services, you really want to think about what implications that has for your practice and your procedures in which you're implementing your programs and services for the families that you serve. Although none of us can ever say with absolute certainty that the programs that achieved were entirely or even partially due to the given program services, we really do want to encourage you in your logic model to link the outcomes, your indicators, and services in a logical way. So, but they also want to be direct enough to give credibility to the notion that your services are contributing to the outcome. So really, I'm kind of encouraging you here to think about what has changed for the people that you serve as a direct result of the services you offered. So next slides, please. So envisioning that change. If this is really where this would be helpful as you're writing down notes on your logic model worksheet. If you conduct your program's activities and succeed with your participants, in other words, they come to your program, they appreciate your program, they're happy to be there, they're engaged. What do you believe? What do they believe or know or have or do as a result of your program or services? And so I really encourage you to think about jotting down, we won't take any time right now, what are 1 or 2 changes that you believe will occur in the lives of your program's participants as a result of your services? And those are kind of really where you want to start thinking about, these are the outcomes that I think are occurring as a result of our programs and services. But I also really want to encourage you to go back and think about including your stakeholders, your program staff, your participants that have been in your programs in the past. Ask them, what do they think? Next slide. And again, I want to encourage you to think about, there are many challenges in evaluating our outcomes. Some of those, how do you show that you've prevented something from happening? Edie made this point earlier. We would like to believe that our services prevent abuse, but the best we can do is demonstrate that we've prevented risk from abuse, or that we've somehow increased the factors that we think keep families and children safe. So again, you may or may not be able to show in your programs that reduction in child abuse and neglect, but what you can show are the factors, the risk factors, or the protective factors that we think are implicated in risk for child abuse and neglect. The other thing is that many of you may not have contact with families long enough that would actually result in long-term growth or change in your participants, and that's okay. So for example, if you work with a prenatal group, pregnant moms, and you lose contact with those families after 3 months, maybe that's due to the fact that the program's not supposed to last any longer than 3 months. But let's say you're seeing a drop off with your families after 3 months after they've given birth, then more than likely you're not really going to be able to measure impacts of children's developmental milestones, for example, beyond the 3-month period. So it really is important when you're thinking about your outcomes to make sure that you're thinking about how your program influences it and whether or not you're able to measure that. Next slide. So in the Friends National Center for Community-Based Child Abuse Prevention, we really want to suggest that you think about outcomes in 3 different perspectives or categories. These are short-term, intermediate, and long-term. In a second, I'm going to tell you, don't worry so much about the time frame, but I think it is important to at least begin to think about the short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. And go ahead, thanks. So the short-term outcomes, we're really talking about engagement outcomes, such as what are the first steps to engaging your families? What are some of, do you have like an open house at the very beginning? Do you have an orientation to your program? Engagement outcomes may also be gaining the trust of your participants, making sure that they're interested in the topic, they're involved. Literally for our home visiting programs, we measured engagement outcomes based on how many families actually allowed us to visit 8 times versus those families that said, we don't want you in our home. And so we only measured outcomes on those families that actually had 8 home visits or more. Otherwise, we knew that the families really weren't engaged. So that one of our key pieces in short-term outcomes was that measurement outcome. Learning outcomes are a second subtype of short-term outcome, and these are really looking at changes in knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs. And so again, when we think about what may be some other ways that we can measure these short-term outcomes is just, how much have you improved in terms of your awareness of parent education? How has your attitude towards your child changed as a result of the program? So those are some of the ideas of short-term outcomes. Next slide. So now we have intermediate outcomes. And so intermediate outcomes, we're really talking about more action oriented. You saw earlier, we were talking more about engagement, learning, less motivation on the part of your participants, or less behavioral change, and more about just kind of seeing if they attend class, or they welcome you into their home as part of a home visit, or they change their attitude. With intermediate outcomes, we really are talking about taking that knowledge that they've learned in the short-term aspect and really beginning to apply it. And so this one may be, some examples might be a parent learns about a parenting program and attends. That would be a short-term outcome. A parent is interested in what the facilitator and other parents are saying. That's an engagement or short-term outcome. When we think about intermediate, we really are thinking about, well, maybe as part of a program, a parent learns 2 or 3 new methods and talks them over with other parents so she understands exactly how the methods work. That would be an example of a learning or short term. She goes home and tries it. That's the intermediate outcome that we would like to see. So moving from learning to action. And it isn't necessarily that it's a permanent change in the parent, but it really is that you're starting to see changes. An example here that we may all be able to relate to is that, say, for example, you decide to join a gym. You show up several times a week, you talk to a personal trainer, you have great workouts, right? Sadly, though, those steps of just going that first week, meeting with your trainer, doesn't necessarily result in you working out on a consistent basis. So we really want to move from learning, how to lift weights to actually actively engaging in lifting weights. We want to see you be able to practice and refine those skills without the personal trainer being present. And then we want to see kind of that ability to go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week without someone else being there telling you to go do it, right? So that's kind of what we mean by these intermediate outcomes. Next slide. So the long-term outcomes, this is the true integration. This is where we really see participants have integrated these new behaviors, new information that they've learned into their lives over time. And it's also consistently practicing those new skills and behaviors. What I want to encourage you here is to think about many of our programs don't last for long periods of time and may or may not be sticky enough so that you're going to be able to measure these long-term outcomes like 12 months after someone's attended your program. So it really is important to think about, what are you able to measure as a part of your program? How long is that time? And it's okay. It doesn't have to be a 12-month measurement when we talk about these short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. Again, I don't want to discourage you and think that you should only be looking at outcomes 12 months after something has occurred, but we really are trying to designate that there are differences in timing for when outcomes may occur. And it's important in your logic model to identify those, so short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, but don't get fixated on them. So here's an idea of how to format those outcomes. And this might be helpful for you when you think about the logic model worksheet. So a short-term outcome, maybe participants know how to appropriately supervise their children. Well, how did they know that? They took your class, right? So intermediate outcome, maybe parents provide appropriate supervision of their home. Again, now they're beginning to act on that knowledge. And a long-term outcome would be parents provide appropriate supervision according to the changing needs of their child as they grow and develop. Because we know that supervision may need to change over time as children get older and have a little bit more responsibility in terms of their own growth and development. An example I want to share with you, and I'll do it really quickly, I promise, Samantha, is giving this example of the state of Indiana. We did not expect our prevention providers to actually provide any of our long-term outcomes. It was the responsibility of the state staff to be able to identify those clients that participated in prevention programs and whether or not we saw a relationship to the reduction in child abuse and neglect. And so we did not make our prevention providers responsible for that. So it may be something to think about too, in terms of how might the state of California help you to identify some of those long-term outcomes related to the reduction in child abuse and neglect, and or keeping families safely together and out of the foster care system as you're thinking about your community comprehensive prevention plan and your logic model. So with that, I think I'm going to switch over now to Edie and have her talk a little bit more about indicators, but I'll also see if we have any questions.
No questions right now, so you're good to go there.
All right, thanks.
All right, so let's talk indicators for a hot minute. I know we're running a little short on time. And so this is one of those things that on our next webinar, we can dive in a little deeper if you guys need some additional support. Outcomes and indicators are really sort of the meat of the logic model. And they take practice. It is an art, not a science. And so really sort of using that who will do what format is super helpful in formatting your outcomes. And the reality is that outcomes need indicators. How do I know that this change has happened? What does that look like, right? Next slide, please. So indicators really are those specific signs that show that you're making progress on your outcomes. They answer that question, what would I see or hear that tells me my outcomes being achieved? They can use numbers or percentages if you're particular about that and you want to set benchmarks, and we'll talk about those here in just a minute. But these are really those concrete descriptions of what you want to measure, right? So let's talk about that. So here's some examples. Indicators are evidence that tells us a change has occurred. So let's talk about an outcome. So participants appropriately manage child behavior. Okay, so that's a who will do what. Participants will appropriately manage child behavior. So what might indicate that this is actually happening? What is something that might actually show this? So participants encourage their children's positive behaviors, right? You could measure that. Are they encouraging their positive behaviors? How about consistently enforce household rules? Participants consistently enforce household rules. You could measure that, right? Participants enforce rules without coercion or physical punishment. Again, something you could measure, and that would tell you that participants are appropriately managing child behavior. So those are examples of what you can do. Some keys here, right? Encourage positive behaviors. That's really what is most helpful in this piece. Really having them look at those pieces, and you'll notice how these examples here on the screen show you. So positive behaviors, you can define those positive behaviors. So words of encouragement, positive behavior, right? Following household rules, positive behavior. Not using coercion or physical punishment, positive behavior. So there we go. And really helping to make sure that they support that, I think, is key. Next slide, please. Actually, the next slide I think is identical. Okay, so let's go on to setting benchmarks. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about setting benchmarks. And I'm gonna get on a soapbox for 2 seconds and say, avoid this when you can. What do I mean by that? So this example is pretty vanilla, right? Parents know how to provide a safe home environment for their children. 80% can name 6 features of a child-safe house. Excuse me. So that's a learning outcome, right? That's a short-term outcome. My apologies. 80% can identify at least 6 common household hazards. 80% can describe how to eliminate or reduce at least 6 household hazards. Absolutely. This is a fairly benign example of using the percentages. Sometimes the percentages are not. And I think that we've got to be careful about setting percentages because they've got to be based on something. My apologies. I'm going to grab a cough drop really quick. So they've got to be based on something. They've got to come from somewhere. So why did we pick 80%? Is that because our funders said that 80% of our participants need to be able to do, certain things? Did we pick that because we think that's a realistic number? Or maybe we based it on, we did a pilot of this, and that seems a reasonable place for us to reach for, to push our folks to get to. Just being versed on that and really having a purpose or a reason behind picking the number you're picking, I think is really important. So here's another example. I'm gonna let you guys just look at this for a second. All right, so I want you guys to take a look at this and pick your worksheet and practice writing one outcome and one indicator. My apologies.
That's all right, Edie, we got this. So yeah, as Edie said, if you would go ahead and take that logic model worksheet that you've been working on and practice writing down one outcome, one indicator based on what you've heard today. And of course, this may change, but just kind of what's coming to top of mind right now. Get some stuff on paper so that you've got some examples you can refer back to. And just keeping in mind that logic models really are an art, not a science. So they need to be logical. We heard Cynthia talking about this earlier. They should be practical and responsive as well. So just take a minute to write down those outcomes and indicators. And Cynthia, I don't see any questions in the chat. So I'm actually going to go to our very last piece of this now. As folks are writing things down, we have heard Cynthia and Edie both talking about measurement. We've heard that word a lot today throughout the conversation. It's time to really look at this now. So once you've identified that outcome that you want to achieve and the things that you're going to see and hear that'll tell you they've been achieved, that's your indicator, you'll need to measure them. How do you know that you've made that difference? And the results of your measurements will provide evidence of whether or not you achieved your outcomes and to what degree you've achieved those outcomes. And this is a really important piece. We know you all are doing good work, but you also need to be able to show you're doing work and be able to measure that. Your funders are looking at that, your stakeholders are looking for that, the families that you are working with, they want to know that what you're offering is doing good and making a difference. So there's a lot of people, Cynthia talked at the beginning about sort of who you report to and who you're accountable to, and this measurement piece is what factors into that. So if we take a look here, that measurement tools test whether that indicator that Edie was just talking about, whether that was achieved. And so what exactly are these measurement tools? And sometimes you have a hard time determining how they're different from indicators. And we were already talking about how to determine how indicators are different than outcomes. It's a lot to remember. So measurement tools are what we use to test whether or not the indicators were achieved. Now, we're all familiar with tests. We've taken many tests in our lifetime, paper and pencil tests. Those are all measurement tools that we're familiar with. We're not really advocating for paper and pencil tests now, but just giving you that reference that we are used to that type of measurement that measures things. Sometimes you may be using, if some of you are using the protective factor survey, that can be a paper and pencil type tool that could work with families. It depends on what your program's doing. But I want to give this quick example again to kind of help you understand what this can look like with measurement tools and whether the indicator was achieved. So you see it here on the slide. And think about if you're working with first-time parents, and an outcome for the parents is to improve nurturing of their child. That's something that they want to work on. And so you see here, the outcome is first-time parents improve in nurturing their child. And in the middle, we've got the indicator and that they improve on the nurturing attachment scale. That'll show that they are improving their nurturing. And then to measure whether or not that they've met that indicator and they've achieved that indicator is by using a measurement tool such as a protective factor survey 2. So that gives you an example of how you go from the outcome to the indicator to the measurement tool there. So here's another example for you. And in this example, again, we're showing you the outcome, the indicator, and the measurement. So the outcome, again, is participants foster the social emotional development of their infants. The indicators that parents correctly identify their infants' verbal and nonverbal cues. And the measurement is the NCAS PCI feeding and teaching scales. So as you are looking at these examples, hopefully you're thinking about what tools you may already be used, your measurement tools or new tools you may want to go and seek out, and how that fits in with your outcomes and your indicators. So I'm going to skip over this. There is, you'll have a graph in your slide deck that you get that has a little bit of a logic model shuffle that shows you where different things go under service activities, short-term outcomes, intermediate term outcomes. You've got this slide, you'll be able to take a look. It's just another example that we have for you. But what I want to do is celebrate. Edie and Cynthia and I have shared a ton of information with you all today. We really want to equip you with getting your logic models ready because we know that that's something that you all have due. I believe it's in January in the coming months. And so want to first of all share some Friends resources that we have. Our Friends website is a great place to go to learn more about evaluation and evaluation planning. We have within our logic model section, we have a menu of outcomes and indicators, a compendium of annotated measurement tools you can go take a look at. We also have a logic model builder where you can go and use this. What we've done today, we've helped you build it via this webinar and writing it down. But if you'd like to go through an actual online kind of step-by-step to build your logic model, we highly encourage you to visit the Friends webpage. Under the evaluation section, you can use a logic model builder. Now we have another resource for you as well. We have a free online learning center up on our Friends website. It looks like this. You can get to it through the Friends website or through the link here on the slide. And one of the courses up there is a logic model course. You can go take this completely for free. It'll walk you through logic models very similarly to how we did today, but there was a lot of information in 90 minutes. And so you can go to this, you can watch this, you can stop and start it. You'll get your own login, so you'll be able to go back in and start up where you had left off with the course. If you'd like to get a little more in depth with logic models, please go check this out. Also gives you a certificate at the end. We know people really like to get those. So I want to go ahead and ask you if you have any questions to please put them up in the Q&A section. But real quickly, I want to talk about that November 3rd workshop, which is also on the calendars. Dana talked about it at the beginning. Edie, Cynthia, and I will be back that day. And what that session will be a workshop where we're actually going to break out. Each of you will end up with one of us in a small group. And we want you to bring your logic model in draft form. We know it may not be completely done. You might just bring what you've been working on today with your notes on it, but we want you to bring some type of work on your logic model to that session on the 3rd and ask us questions. You may even be able to pull it up on the screen, and us and the others in the small breakout room with you can share input. You'll get to see examples from other people's logic models. It's really going to be a workshop. It's not a training like this, but you're just going to learn about what other people are doing. You'll be able to ask us any questions that you'd like and really get some more one-on-one time with one of the three of us to help you get that logic model really set, strong, and ready to go. So that is on November 3rd. I hope all of you can join us. You also have our contact information. So if you're not able to be there on the 3rd or you have questions in the meantime, you can reach out to any of us. But I want to pause, check in with my co-trainers on questions or comments. I see there might be some things in the chat.
Mainly
has anything come up?
links and awesome training. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for the great feedback. We really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A either.
All right. Well, don't be shy.
Think we have arrived at the end of this webinar. I first want to thank Samantha, Cynthia, and Edie for this really great overview of logic models. It's really nice to see it broken down so that it's really simple to understand and really think through and all of the pieces. And I want to thank our participants for joining us this morning, especially because I do know that a lot of you have been attending a lot of training lately in preparation for doing comprehensive prevention plans. And that is taking a lot of your attention, focus, and dedication of time. And we really do appreciate seeing you at each of these trainings. I am going to come back to the November 3rd training one more time, even though we've mentioned it a couple of times, because what I do want to say is if you think that November 3rd might be useful, hey, I've got part of a logic model, I've got maybe a whole logic model to look at, but I'd like somebody to help me tighten it up. Also think about who on your team, whether it's somebody within your program, if you're working on an agency logic model, or maybe you are sitting here going, oh, how does this work for a comprehensive prevention plan logic model for my entire county? I wonder who needs to be in the room for this. So think for a couple of moments, who does need to be in the room for this, and then invite them. And when you invite them, make sure to either provide them with the recording link that we're going to send you, or there will also be a link to the self-paced course that you just saw on the Friends website. Make sure they have the opportunity to either or both watch the recording or take the course, so they also have this foundational knowledge and you're coming as a team to that workshop to really get some work done on November 3rd. So that is my pitch for November 3rd. There is a survey in the chat now. We would love for you to complete it. There is a certificate at the end, and you will receive a follow-up email within the next 2 days. It will have recording, all of the links, registration information for the workshop, basically anything you could need to keep going on logic models. And again, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you again on November 3rd. Have a fantastic day, everyone.